We are set to unpack the politics of it all and the possibility of an election, I should say, with our front bench in a few moments. But right now, we want to drill down on the possible content of this budget, its significance to Canadians, and of course, really to the economy more largely. This budget comes after a long wait. It's been since spring of 2024 that we've seen a budget tabled. There was, of course, last December, a fall economic statement, but that was buried by Chrystia Freeland resigning that day. So it's been a long time coming, I guess you could say. And here to help us unpack the potential significance from an economic perspective of this budget are three experts in the field. Former Finance Minister John Manley is with us. He's the chair of Jefferies Financial Canada and the chair of the TELUS Corp board. Jean-François Perrault is Scotiabank's senior vice president and chief economist. And rounding us out this evening is CTV News chief financial correspondent Amanda Lang. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you tonight. Thank you very much for making the time. Amanda, I will start with you because I noticed today, and my colleague Abigail Beeman was reporting earlier, the finance minister did not call this today a budget of investment and austerity, like we heard the prime minister say a few months ago. He used the word investment over and over again. What does that tell you?
I mean, I think it tells us that they want us to focus on where we're going. This is a budget that will be a vision of what Canada can do in the face of some pretty dire circumstances. It's also obviously going to have to lay out some details around what it does in the face of lower revenue and a real economic challenge. So I actually wondered, Vashti, whether that word austerity from the Prime Minister wasn't so much about the cuts he's going to present, although we do expect to see some of that, but about what the government itself is dealing with. It is actually dealing with, of course, arguably a weaker revenue outlook in the face of everything that's going on, and yet it has to spend. So it's this weird kind of push-pull situation. Former Finance Minister Manley must be being glad he's not there trying to do it, where you have to invest and you've got less money to do it with.
John, let me jump off that point and ask you, like, what kind of conundrum in that vein do you think this government faces?
Well, first of all, they've got to worry about our fiscal situation. We haven't really followed a fiscal anchor in quite a long time in Canada, and eventually that catches up with you. We reached a point in the early days of the Chrétien government when we almost couldn't float our bonds on the international markets because, strangely enough, when you borrow money, the people who lend it to you want to be sure that they're going to get repaid and that they're going to earn a return on it. So what's the fiscal anchor going to be is one big question. The Prime Minister in his campaign promised a different way of accounting, a capital budget and an expenditure budget, or a consumption budget, if you like, the capital budget being for investments, and said that we'll balance the other budget, the expenditure budget, while we're borrowing to do capital investments. Let's see what that actually means. How do they define it? An investment to me means you're putting money into something that's going to pay a return. We've seen lots of things called investments over the past. They don't necessarily pay returns to the government.
Jean-François, I wondered if you could paint a picture for us of the level of uncertainty in the economy that they face right now. Like, what are the headwinds that, in part, this trade war has brought upon us?
Yeah, and I think that's an extremely important way to think about the budget that will be announced tomorrow. And the Governor of the Bank of Canada has talked about this extensively as well. I mean, the economy is weak. There's no question about that. But it's weak for two reasons. It's weak in part structurally. It's weak because productivity has been low for a long time. Investment's been low. And that creates kind of a weak economy with which to deal with the types of shocks that we're dealing with now. But importantly, what's going on in the context of this trade conflict with the Americans and this broader realignment of economic activity is a need to transform the economy, which, of course, the Prime Minister campaigned on very effectively. And that will entail a need for significant amounts of investment, ideally by the private sector, but obviously with some government assistance of some form, to help the economy kind of transition from the world in which we've been operating to the world in which we will be operating over the next, few years and maybe longer than that. So that's a tricky thing for governments to manage. How do we think about fiscal policy in that context? How do we think about the size of the budget deficit that is required? Is the budget deficit required to kickstart the economy, kickstart this transformation? Of course, the government is making a bet and an informed decision. I suspect that is the case, that we do need some government assistance, some government help to, start that transition, to catalyze investment. But of course, how effective they will be will depend to some extent on what's in the budget tomorrow and how they go about convincing us that they are doing the right things for us.
So the finance minister asks you, Amanda, what advice do you have for me? I want to catalyze private investment, because exactly what Jean-Francois said in that vein is what we have heard the prime minister in particular say that will be the objective of either policy or the investments ultimately that they make on that so-called side of the ledger. What kinds of policies or investments, in your view, would be effective in that manner?
So the problem here, Vashi, is there's nothing new. They're not reinventing anything. The way you catalyze investment is create circumstances that create confidence. So you want to invite capital in, which means that you're reducing your red tape and your government regulations. You could lower corporate taxes. You could do things to incentivize investment by business. But we've done those things in the past, and we haven't seen a massive return. And we're in an emergency. So the real problem here is we actually need government spending that actually creates almost a near-term return. So when we think about this new ledger they're going to present with this long-term kind of capital investment spending, it sounds great, and there is a real benefit in that. But you can say we're building a mine in Northern Ontario. The actual economic payoff of that is way down the road. And housing, you can create construction jobs in the near term, Vashi, by investing in housing. Housing's kind of non-productive to productive capital investment. So how do you actually create economic growth in Canada? It's with trade. We have to trade with the rest of the world. And that's not necessarily an investment so much as trade deals and policies that spur activity.
Are you concerned at all, John, about sort of what Amanda lays out there, which is when we say the word transform, like by its own nature, that's not something that happens overnight. So like what will be or what could be stimulative in the near term without adding to the fiscal issues that you already laid out?
Well, I think there are a few items that Amanda's already mentioned. I mean, clearly you've got to get your investment climate right. We're net importers of capital. We need the capital to do the works that need to be done, whether they're long-term or short-term. And that means that investors have to have some confidence that they can get to a yes when they want to build a project. They have to be satisfied that the returns they're going to get are as good or better than the returns they can get elsewhere. And that means, in part, we've got to be able to demonstrate that we have access to international markets, including the United States. It doesn't have to be tariff-free. We can deal with tariffs, but other markets as well. We're rich in natural resources. We've been very poor at getting those out of the ground and into foreign hands, where we want to sell them in order to get the returns on them. That's the quickest way for us to earn the kind of money that we need to make, is to get those resources to markets. And it means regulatory reforms, and it means that we've got to have the Prime Minister and a cabinet and provincial premiers that are out there saying, we can do this, we are going to do this, we're going to strip down those interprovincial trade barriers once and for all. We're going to build the infrastructure necessary in our ports, on our highways, our transportation systems, not just pipelines, but all of the other things that we need to do in order to get our goods into foreign hands.
Jean-Francois, what is your perspective on, and what we've kind of talked about in laying out things they can do near-term, mid-term, long-term, your perspective on the fiscal situation? There's been a ton of conversation, sometimes debate, about how sustainable or not the federal government's finances are. What is your level of concern about, let's say, a $75 billion deficit? What does it mean to you?
I'm not overly concerned with the short-term deficit number. It clearly is going to be a big number. It's 75, 80, 100. I mean, we'll see. What I worry about, or what I'm more interested in, is the path going forward as a kind of a secondary consideration to what you're actually getting for the 75, 80, 100, whatever the deficit's going to be in the short run. Right? If you have a deficit that generates growth, that again catalyzes investment, that leads to stronger private sector investment next year and even more so hopefully beyond that, that's an entirely different context in which you evaluate whether a budget deficit is sustainable or not. And historically, of course, that's not been the case. We run big deficits. It's not led to the type of investment that would increase what we call potential output growth, so medium-term growth. If there's elements of this budget that stream transformation that are clearly going to lead to higher private sector investment, that will lead to higher productivity. You know, if that costs us a little bit in the short run to kickstart that, I think it's okay. Now, if this time next year we're having this conversation and we've done the $75 or $100 billion deficit and productivity hasn't turned around, there isn't any early evidence that the private sector is doing anything differently, then it's a very different story, very different conversation going to have. But right now, you know, we've got a government that seems to understand the challenges we're facing, that we need a lot more investment. They're focused on that. Part of the reason I think they have this split between operating capital is to signal that they're really serious about the capital side of things. And that gives me a greater degree of comfort that they will do the right things tomorrow and in months beyond that, relative to, say, previous governments who were less focused on, you know, increasing capital stock.
Amanda, the government has signaled a lot about what they want Canadians to know will be in this budget. Is there something that they haven't signaled yet that you would like to see explained, you know, detailed in the budget in some way?
You know what, Vashti, as we have this conversation, what I'm really thinking about is I want to be surprised by something. I want to see something they haven't shared with us yet that's really visionary, that makes me say, yes, this gives me confidence. You know, to JF's point, you can spend an awful lot of money. And if you're fighting off an emergency, your house is on fire, you need to put the fire out. If you've ever seen a house after it's been fire hosed, it doesn't look very good. You can spend a lot of money and not get anywhere. And then you've got this massive debt. What we would all, I think, like to see is something we haven't heard yet, something that will actually propel the country in some direction where the investment makes sense and will actually kind of galvanize not just us but foreign investors as well, that there's a real kind of vision for the future here. I'm not saying we're going to get it. That's what I wish for, because that's really what we need right now. This is an emergency, but we can't waste the opportunity and spend on things that don't make a difference.
I'll leave it there. Amanda Lang, John Manley, and Jean-François Perrault, thank you very much, all three of you. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you.